Hello everyone and welcome. I am back at it again with another solved true crime case for you all. My last two cases I have covered were unsolved cases, so for this case I really wanted to do a solved one. I personally do like doing solved cases a little bit better in a way because at least they have answers whether you like the outcome or not. At least you know who is responsible, and it always feels good to know that the families have that type of closure to what happened. But with unsolved cases, it's extremely frustrating when you don't have the answers, and it's upsetting to me thinking about their families and the loved ones and how every day they constantly question who could have done this to them. I'm sure it haunts them every single second of the day, and I couldn't imagine having to deal with that type of pain, that heartache of not knowing what happened to someone that you love. But for case number 8, we are going to be talking about a horrific situation. I will now put up my disclaimer for you all to read. This case does involve a 10-year-old girl who is murdered in a very scary and a very demeaning and horrific way. It's not your typical murder case. It's not someone who took her in the middle of the night and killed her. It's a very uncommon situation. For this case, we will be discussing a brutal and slow murder of a child during a therapy session. This one is very heartbreaking, and I know while I was researching it, I got so angry because of how easily this could have been prevented or stopped. But instead, it led to this little girl's death. Mental health and illness will also be talked about. So if you don't want to continue with this case, I understand. Go ahead and click out. Don't be shy to come back for future videos. But let's go ahead and get into this case, the murder of Candace Newmaker. Candace Elizabeth Newmaker was born on November 19th, 1989 in Lincolnton, North Carolina. Her birth name was actually Candace Tiara Elmore, and she was born to her parents Angela and Todd Elmore. Angela was a very young teen mother at the age of 17 when Candace was born and when she first got married to Todd, who was 23 at the time. Candace would also be the oldest of the children, as she also had a younger sister, Chelsea, born in 1991, and a younger brother, Michael, who was born in 1992. Her father had a very difficult time keeping a job, and Angela also tried to work odd jobs, fast food industries to nursing homes, but Todd was very controlling, and he always seemed to put a stop to Angela working. With 3 young little kids to take care of, Angela wasn't able to complete school, and with Todd not being able to keep a job for more than a couple of weeks at a time, things quickly became hard for this family of 5. The family would constantly have to move from one place to another, mostly to cheaper apartments or trailers. Money was very tight for them, to the point where Todd started to sell their things like the kids' high chairs and even Angela's wedding ring just to get by. On top of money issues, the police were constantly called to their residence due to domestic dispute issues, with Todd allegedly abusing and hitting Angela. Candace was about 3 years old around this time, and she was constantly witnessing the abuse her father would do to her mother. At this time of her life, Candace had been described as having a strong and protective personality. She did not like seeing anyone cry, but she was also developing a very quick temper. She already at this age wanted to protect her mother and her siblings from her father. I read that on even some occasions, she at the ages of 4 or 5 years old would get between her parents when they were fighting. She would put herself in the middle of them, and she even started hitting her father back when she noticed that he was hitting Angela. Candace was so strong through all of this. She had to be. Eventually, after a while of police being called every so often, social services did get involved with the situation, and Candace, Chelsea, and Michael were removed from the home. Candace was just 5 years old when Todd and Angela's parental rights were terminated. Angela tried to gain back custody of her children, but she was continuously denied. Candace and her siblings bounced around from foster homes until at the age of 7, when Candace was adopted by a single mother, a 42-year-old nurse by the name of Jean Newmaker, who I am going to refer as JN for the rest of this video. I unfortunately couldn't find what happened to Candace's siblings. It's pretty safe to assume that they were eventually adopted as well into different families, but they weren't together, and I'm sure that was extremely difficult for Candace as she was the oldest. She adored her siblings, and at this point she was 5, so she was fully aware of what was going on around her, and all she knew was that she just lost everyone she loved, her mother, her brother, and her sister. And I couldn't imagine how difficult that was for her going through that at such a young age. So Candace didn't have an easy upbringing, but her mother Angela, she adored her children. And it's horrible that due to the situation they were in, she lost her kids. It's heartbreaking. And sadly, Angela never got to see her daughter again after she was taken away at 5 years old. At this point, Candace was around 7 years old, and she had just been adopted by her single mother, J.N., and she was now living a completely different life in Durham, North Carolina. Her name was legally changed from Candace Tiara Elmore to Candace Elizabeth Newmaker on June 14, 1996. J.N. came from a very wealthy family and tried to give Candace everything that she could. Candace now had things like a swimming pool. She took riding lessons, had sleepovers with other kids. She was enrolled at the top school in the district. J.N. really tried to give Candace the best life that she could. But under the surface, Candace was struggling. She still had a pretty quick temper, and she would snap at other kids and classmates. Her classmates knew she was adopted, and they would bully her a little bit for this. But overall, Candace was pretty well behaved at school according to her teachers. But according to J.N., her behavior at home was a completely different story. Candace was distant towards her adopted mother. J.N. would attempt to bond with Candace, but she was having a difficult time bonding and showing any type of affection towards J.N. All those around Candace describe her as highly mature for her age. She was very a matter of fact about everything, and it was pretty shocking to people that were around her of how grown up she acted. But when you understand the type of situation she grew up in, it's normal for a child to have to grow up fast when they are in that situation. As months went by, Candace Newmaker, according to J.N., refused to look at her in the eyes. She would refuse any type of affection from her. She wouldn't hold J.N.'s hand. She wouldn't allow any hugs from her. She described how she acted more like a moody teenager than a young girl under 10 years old. J.N. wanted to bond with Candace, and she obviously didn't like the type of behavior Candace was showing towards her. So she began to take Candace to see counselors and various other health professionals to quote-unquote fix Candace's behavior. Candace saw therapists and psychiatrists, and they treated her for things such as depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. They prescribed medication to Candace, giving her mood stabilizers in an attempt to make her less moody. The medications Candace took didn't seem to help at all. In fact, according to J.N., it seemed to make her worse. She described that Candace allegedly on one occasion was caught playing with matches. Some other sources actually state that she did set a small fire to the house. And then on another occasion, Candace allegedly purposely killed her pet goldfish. J.N. was starting to get very frustrated with the situation and the lack of progress being made, and she continued to take Candace to several other doctors. She began researching desperately, trying to find solutions for Candace. That is when she came across a diagnosis. This diagnosis is often used in adoption or foster care type situations. It's called reactive attachment disorder, or RAD. It is a disorder that is caused when a child or a newborn does not form a healthy or secure connection with their parents or caretakers. It is a rare disorder that typically begins to appear in children that are 9 months old to 5 years old who experience tragic events in their early life, such as emotional, physical abuse, or being neglected. The likelihood of reactive attachment disorder does increase when a child is taken away from their parents that they have already formed a bond with. RAD leads children struggling with creating and forming relationships throughout their life. They have trouble controlling their emotions, and they are often described as feeling alone, irritable, or sad, and they do not have a desire to bond with their current parent or caregiver. J.N. was convinced that Candace was suffering from RAD and gave her concerns to the doctors that they visited. Some articles do conflict. Some say that she was officially diagnosed with RAD, and others say that J.N. herself was the only one who came to that specific diagnosis. But regardless, Candace did not fully qualify for this disorder. She allegedly had symptoms based on J.N.'s description of her behavior, but J.N. was the only person who ever saw these behaviors from Candace. Neighbors, teachers, and anyone else Candace interacted with claim that they never saw those types of behaviors from Candace. People suffering from RAD have difficulty forming bonds and social interactions with everyone, but Candace Newmaker was perfectly able having conversations with those around her. If she was so distant with J.N., no one else saw it but J.N. Candace did continue with counseling. In late 1999, J.N. attended a conference in Alexandria, Virginia on reactive attachment disorder presented by a licensed psychiatrist by the name of William or Bill Gobble. After the presentation, where he described the disorder and discussed treatment solutions, Jan walked up to Bill and discussed with him the situation she has with Candace. Bill instructed Jan to fill out an inventory sheet questionnaire of Candace's behaviors, and based on the paper that she filled out, according to Bill, Candace had a fairly severe case of RAD. But Bill never actually saw Candace. Bill informed Jan that he was unable to take another case at the time, so he referred her to a woman named Connell Watkins, who I will call CW from this point forward. CW was located in Evergreen, Colorado. Jan contacted CW and informed her of Candace's behavior, and she agreed to treat Candace. Jan signed a contract for a 2-week intensive session for $7,000 of what is known as attachment therapy on January 20th, 2000. Some forms of attachment therapy are extremely controversial, and you will quickly see why. Many techniques used for this type of therapy are what I can only describe as abusive. CW promised that after this 2-week session with Candace, her behavior problems would improve and a stronger bond between Candace and Jan would form. So Jan and Candace then traveled over 1,000 miles to Evergreen, Colorado to participate in these sessions. And here is where we will add 3 more clowns to this case. The sessions were conducted leading with CW herself, her assistant Julie Ponder, JP, and also joining these sessions were therapeutic foster parents, as they were called, Brita St. Clair, BSc, and Jack McDaniel, JMD. And I know it can get a tiny bit confusing with this many people and me referring to them by their initials, but all of these adults make me absolutely sick, and they do not deserve, in my opinion, to even be referred respectfully by their names. So bear with me on the initials. JN, Candace's adopted mother, would also participate in these sessions when she was needed to. So let's talk a little bit about the form of attachment therapy they made Candace Newmaker participate in. As I said, these techniques are extremely controversial, and these people that were treating Candace fully believed in these techniques and that they worked. CW referred to this therapy that she supposedly specialized in as rebirth therapy, which, in a nutshell, for rebirth therapy, the ultimate goal is to restrain the child by causing rage or despair to the point where the child, quote-unquote, breaks and they degenerate back to an infantile state or regress to an age where they can be more easily reparented or controlled. The main focus of this therapy, to my understanding, emphasizes obedience and ultimately is just negative reinforcement to the child in order for the child to comply with their parents' commands. There is a history of this therapy where methods were used such as evasive tickling or restricting access to food, water, or a bathroom to also get the child to regress to an infant state. For the record, I do not have any type of psychological degree. I am not an expert by any means. I did take several psychology courses in high school and in college because I do find it incredibly interesting. But to me, this type of therapy seems just super ridiculous and unnecessary. They are basically trying to manipulate little children, traumatizing them in various ways with the hope that they can be retrained, as they called it, to modify their behavior. Some of these sessions would include several adults restraining the child for long periods of time, purposely enraging them to tears, forcing them to remain in contact with the therapist as they are held down. These are dangerous things that they were doing to small children. I read that there are 6 known fatalities due to this type of therapy, including this case. So obviously, this is a massive issue. Thankfully, it is not practiced anymore, because I'm sure that the majority of the kids that did go through these types of therapies, that did survive, they probably developed even more psychological problems. I don't agree with using fear or pain to modify behavior. At the very least, not to this ridiculous extent to children. In my opinion, this was doing more harm than good, and Candace Newmaker had to endure similar techniques during her sessions. So now it's time to talk about the timeline for Candace's time in Colorado. Candace and Jan arrived in Colorado as scheduled on April 10th, 2000. Immediately upon arrival, Candace visited psychiatrist John Alston, who prescribed her with more medications to stabilize her moods during her time in Colorado. These medications will be changed several times as her attachment therapy progressed. Candace stayed in what they called a foster home and lived with BSc and JMD. She was given medication daily by JMD, who instructed her to call him Daddy Jack, which that in itself is disgusting to me. This son of a bitch had no medical training whatsoever, yet was the one giving her medication every day as scheduled, and he was apparently being paid $700 to write reports of Candace's progress, and described her as being entirely gone after taking these medications. BSC was pretty much just the host during her stay with them, and she also did not have any type of medical training. During her first week of sessions, Candace had undergone a 3-hour session where she was wrapped in a sheet with her head exposed. JN, her adopted mother, was instructed to lay a cross on top of her to form a cross, and she was on top of her for a couple of hours. Then Candace was released from the sheet. JN moved to a chair across from her. Candace was instructed to crawl to her, then lay on her lap like a baby and be fed by JN from a plate. And by the way, all of these sessions were recorded and used as evidence during the court case. And a reminder again, she's a 10-year-old girl at this point and weighed approximately 70 pounds. And she was being instructed to do this. According to CW, the purpose of this exercise was for Candace to become compliant and for JN to be in charge. And I bet you that Candace felt like this exercise was stupid, pointless, and demeaning, like I'm sure a lot of us do. But she did what she was told during these sessions. In total, there were 10 hours worth of videos for these sessions, and they are not released to the public because of the abusive things they did to Candace. Throughout the next week and a half, Candace had a few more sessions. In another 2-hour session during her first week, one of the therapists, I am assuming either CW or JP, I am honestly not sure which one, but one of them grabbed Candace's face, forced her to keep eye contact with JN 90 times. When she would look away and not keep eye contact, she was violently shaken a total of 309 times. And then she was screamed at. Inches away from her face, she was screamed at a total of 68 times during this 2-hour session. And during this session, she was also, again, laying on JN's lap on the floor, while JMD was sitting on top of her legs. And I'm just guessing the purpose of that session was to train her to keep eye contact, but what the hell? She was 10 years old. It's really infuriating. I did read in another session, JN was instructed to lay on top of Candace again for an hour and 42 minutes. And during that session, JN was instructed to lick Candace's face several times. And I guess that was the start of doing that irritability, agitating, making them full of rage thing. In another session, Candace's long hair that she adored was chopped off. And then in another session, Candace was instructed to lay on the floor and do scissor kicks until she physically couldn't do them anymore due to exhaustion. These sessions probably felt like absolute hell for Candace. Could anyone imagine being 10 years old and going through multiple sessions, getting screamed at, being underneath a grown adult for hours, pretty much pretending that you're a little baby again, while all of these other adults just watched and demeaned you, instructed you to do silly, unnecessary, torturous things? It's just absolutely unbelievable. But that brings us to the morning of April 18th, 2000. And I will give you all a huge warning here. Every portion of this session is disturbing and infuriating. If you don't want to hear the details, please click ahead. I will have a timestamp in the description to skip this part. I understand if you want to skip this because it's just so horrific to even read. Candace and JN arrived at the home of CW for what they call the rebirth session at around 9 a.m. In their version of this, rebirthing is a session where they attempt to simulate a person of being back in the birth canal the day that they are born and re-inflicting the physical distress of the birthing process. So they pretty much reenact the birth process. The person is wrapped in sheets and sometimes even pillows very tightly, mimicking a mother's womb. The sheets are tied up, and they usually have one or more adults lay on top or restraint the individual. Then the person is then instructed to fight their way out of the pillows and sheets. Once they manage to get free, they're supposed to be held by their parent or caregiver, and they are, quote, reborn to the arms of their loving parent. This was the plan they had for Candace's session in order for her to attach to her adopted mother, JN. At 9:44 a.m., they begin the rebirth session. This entire session was videotaped and recorded like the other sessions, and it lasts a total of 70 minutes. Transcripts are available online. I will not be reading from the entire transcript because of how disturbing it is. I will read a few lines to show how inhumane they treated Candace. But I will link the transcript also in the description if anyone wants to read its entirety. But be warned if you do, because it's truly one of the most horrifying things I have ever read that happens to a child. There are a total of 5 adults in the room. You have CW, the lead therapist, JP, her assistant, BSC, the foster mother or host Candace had been staying with, and JMD, the foster father. And then you have JN in the room also with Candace. The session begins with JP instructing Candace Newmaker to lie down on a navy blue flannel sheet and to get into a fetal position. She tells Candace to imagine herself as a baby inside her mother's womb, where it is warm and it feels very tight. Candace is then wrapped in the blue sheet along with pillows. The ends of the sheet are twisted with JP holding it. Then the 4 adults, excluding JN, go on top of Candace's body. Mind you, Candace weighs about 70 pounds. And the amount of weight that was on top of her from these 4 grown-ass adults in total was 673 pounds. They are restraining her and sitting on top of her. And this is about 1 minute and 25 seconds into this session. Candace is asked how she is feeling. She responds by saying immediately that she feels like she is going to die. She is instructed to find her way out to be born. And meanwhile, JN is waiting for her to come out of this sheet and is saying things like, "I can't wait to meet my baby. I'm going to love and protect you." Throughout the next several minutes, Candace begins to struggle to try to push her way out of this sheet. At around 8 minutes in, with Candace still struggling to get out of this sheet, she begins to panic. She starts crying and she screams, telling them that she can't find her way out and that she can't breathe. She continues to ask them which way she has to go in order to get out, and also complains that someone is sitting on top of her head and she can't move. Her cries for help continue for several more minutes. By minute 14, Candace continuously repeats that she is going to die. At one point, she even says that she wants to die. This is the point where CW and JP begin to tell Candace to go ahead and to die. And I will read a couple of lines from the transcript to show you all what monsters these women were. At 16 minutes 8 seconds, Candace, who is still crying, says, "Can you let me have some oxygen? You mean like you want me to die for real?" JP responds to her by saying, "Uh-huh." Candace says in response, "Die right now and go to heaven?" JP says, "Go ahead and die right now, for real, for real." Then at 17 minutes 7 seconds, Candace, who has labored breathing at this point, says, "Get off. I'm sick. Get off. Where am I supposed to come out? Where? But how can I get there?" Then CW responds this time by saying, "Just go ahead and die. It's easier. It takes a lot of courage to be born." A couple of minutes later, at the 19-minute mark, you can hear Candace as she throws up, and she also defecates from within the sheet. Candace tells them that she got sick, and CW has the audacity to say that she can stay in there with her own feces and vomit. Candace, for several more minutes, yells again that she can't breathe. A couple of the adults on top of her reposition themselves a few times as she continues to struggle to get free. Then at the 30-minute mark, CW instructs that Candace needs more pressure around her face, so that way she can really start to fight. And so they begin pressing her down more for another 10 minutes. Then at around 39 minutes, CW says, "It's her own life, quitter." And Candace gives a very soft response and simply says, "No." And this is Candace's last word. And this torture doesn't end for another almost 30 minutes. The remainder of what is on the videotape transcript recording for the next half hour is of CW and JP calling Candace a quitter over and over again. At around 50 minutes, CW and JP get off from on top of Candace and leave the room with JN, as if they just gave up on her. The other 2 assistants, JMD and BSC, still remain on top of Candace, who has not given a response for over 20 minutes at this point. And even during this time, after they're off her and are in another room, CW and JP continue to mock her for being a quitter. Then at 1 hour and 9 minutes, the other 2 adults are finally instructed to get off of Candace by CW. They now have come back into the room. They unwrap her, and the final sentence stated from the transcript is from CW, who says, "Oh, there she is, sleeping in her vomit." JN, who at this point was watching the video from the monitor in the other room, saw that Candace was not moving, and she screamed and immediately ran back into the room. The videotape does end. Candace was blue and not breathing at all. JN immediately began CPR on Candace, while CW called 911 paramedics at 10:56 a.m. They arrived at the scene about 10 minutes later. They noticed vomit on Candace's face, blood on her nose, and that she was cold to the touch, which indicates that Candace Newmaker had not been breathing for a while. At the time, all the therapists told the paramedics that they had left Candace alone for a few minutes during the rebirthing therapy, and when they came back, that's when she wasn't breathing, which was a blatant lie, as the video that was recorded shows that at not one point did anyone leave Candace alone during the session. Her pupils were fixed and dilated, and she had some redness to her eyes, which are signs of asphyxia. Miraculously, at around 11:20 a.m., they were able to get Candace's heart beating again, with a faint pulse. She was immediately taken to the nearest children's hospital, and she did survive the night. But in the morning of April 19th, 2000, at 9 a.m., Candace Newmaker was pronounced brain dead due to asphyxiation. She had an extreme brain injury during the hour-long suffocation that she endured. She passed away later that day after being pronounced brain dead. Her official cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation, which pretty much means that she was ultimately smothered to death. After Candace's death, J.N. returns home to North Carolina. News does spread that Candace had passed away, but no one would know of her true cause of death for another month. A memorial was held for Candace. Her entire 4th grade class and her teacher made an appearance. Jan was there as well, of course. She didn't speak to anyone during the service. Everyone assumed Candace had been a part in some tragic and terrible accident. It wasn't until May 18th, 2000, when all of the adults that were a part of the rebirthing session were arrested for Candace's murder, did the truth come out about Candace's death. Her story made massive headlines, and so many people couldn't understand how something like this could have possibly happened. Fortunately, this was a very quick trial overall. The 4 assailants claimed that it was an accident and pleaded not guilty, but with video and audio taped evidence, it was clear to everyone in court that this was not the case. CW and JP were tried and convicted for reckless child abuse resulting in death. And this part is upsetting to me. They only received 16-year sentences. And by the way, one of the most angering parts about the trial to me was that it did come out and it was revealed that neither CW or JP had licenses to even practice therapy. They were unlicensed. And it's truly just completely unbelievable, in my opinion. To me, that itself is fraud, and they should have gotten at least 10 years in prison for that, but they didn't. I don't know if Jan was aware of their unlicensed status. I couldn't find anything on whether she knew or not, but 16 years was not nearly enough for what they made Candace endure. CW was paroled in 2008 after only serving 7 years of her 16-year sentence. And frustratingly, I could not find the status on JP. It's been well over 16 years now, as of 2017, so she's out in the world as well. BSC and JMD, for their part in Candace's murder, had originally also pleaded not guilty, but they were offered a plea bargain for their cooperation to testify against CW and JP. And they did end up pleading guilty for criminally negligent child abuse, and they were given 10 years probation and 1,000 hours of community service. They claimed during their testimony that they had fully trusted CW and JP, as they had known them for 10 years, and they believed that they had known what they were doing. Those two did not receive any jail time for contributing to Candace's death. And finally, JN, who, in my opinion, is also an accomplice to Candace's murder, was also tried, and she actually did plead guilty to child abuse resulting in death, which is actually a lesser felony to reckless child abuse resulting in death. And she was given a 4-year suspended sentence. But this was later expunged from her record, which is very convenient since she was a pediatric nurse. So she never received any prison time as well either, since it was a suspended sentence. And what's even more upsetting is that Angela, Candace's birth mother, was not informed of Candace's death until September of 2000. Candace was murdered in April. That's 5 entire months without any knowledge that her daughter was gone. And she was completely heartbroken when she found out. She has a massive blame toward social services for taking her children away, and of course at JN for attempting this rebirth on her daughter. Angela had also grown up in the foster system as a child herself, and she knew how broken the system is. But despite her pleas to keep her children, they were still taken away. And as the ultimate result of them taking away Candace, she lost her life. And again, Angela never got to see her after she was taken from her when she was 5 years old. And that's absolutely horrendous and heartbreaking. The one positive thing that did come out of this tragedy was Candace's law. This law was passed even before the trial ended. Her law prohibits and outlaws the practice of rebirth therapy and any type of restraining therapy in the state of Colorado and North Carolina. The other states also created similar laws based off of Candace's law. 6 children too many were victims of this type of therapy. So at least with Candace's law, many other lives have now been saved. But that is all I have for this case. This was a really horrific one. Thank you all who have stayed through the entire video. I know it was extremely difficult to hear, but I think it's important to hear Candace's story and to remember her. Children should not have to endure such disgusting practices. I don't care how mentally ill or how bad their behavior is. No child or person deserves to have to go through what Candace went through. But it's cases like hers that we need to share and to read about, because then we are able to prevent other similar murders like this from happening. I do not agree with how the perpetrators were sentenced at all. It felt more like a slap on the wrist at the end of the day, and that's unacceptable to me. But please comment down below on your opinions. Do you agree that their sentences were too light on this situation, or am I just too unforgiving? I would love to see everyone's comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. But that is it for me today. I'll catch you on the next video in case number 9. Bye, everyone.